My name is Arnold Leitner, and I beat the often path by having devoted my life to the preservation and enhancement of the natural and cultural world. By this I mean is that the natural wonder of the Amazon is as important as the cultural achievements and the scientific achievements that mankind has accomplished. That the beauty of an orchid opening on that morning is as fantastic as the opening of a solar panel to feed power to the Webb telescope. So I decided a long time ago that the way we can accomplish both is that we have abundant energy available that allows us to grow food for a human on the size of a pool table, or clean water for our city so that it won't pollute rivers and estuaries. And so that is what I've devoted my life to, and that's the path I've taken.
Welcome back to the Beat the Often Path podcast. I'm your host, Ross Palmer. On this show, we showcase unusual success stories to help us think outside the box in our lives and careers and to radically redefine what success means. My guest today is Arnold Leitner, the founder, CEO, and president of YouSolar. His innovative approach to solar power and battery storage has gotten him millions in investments so far. Now, he spent 2 decades innovating in solar, founding 2 prominent companies in the space called SkyFuel and ReflecTech before his latest endeavor. YouSolar's modular battery grid and solar panel combo allows you to dramatically reduce your need for grid power, for example, in your home, or completely eliminate your need altogether. And it can keep your house running in the case of a power failure, which is great for all of us, but also people in countries where power is not so reliable. It's tech that I hope that someday all of us can have in our homes. So here's Arnold Leitner of YouSolar. Well, welcome to the show, Arnold. That is one of the most fabulous introductions we've had so far. I agree with everything that you just said. 2 brilliant points. We're going to get into the marriage of the natural world with human achievement, things that I'm both very passionate about. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So it's not every day that somebody who builds a solar panel company will talk about an orchid opening or the Amazon rainforest. But for some of us in this world, those 2 things do go together and they do make sense. So how did you end up on this path? And what about those 2 things did you see could be merged in your own life?
Yeah, I began in conservation, and that's not because I wasn't scientifically interested. I began in conservation because I lived in Europe. I lived in Germany. And in the early and mid 80s, Germany was still transforming itself into a more industrial world. So more and more natural habitats were, taken away to build roads or otherwise homes were built. So that has changed, by the way. Meanwhile, in Germany, nature's returning, reclaiming as the pace of industrialization has actually slowed down. I discovered this when I go there. And then, of course, we had all the other challenges at the time that were happening on the planet, which were, manifest in Jimmy Carter's, seminal work, Global 2000, where he had laid out a vision, or his administration had laid out a vision how to build a sustainable planet. So in all of this, I saw a responsibility and opportunity, for me to make a difference and to really work in conservation. So my path was through protecting peregrine falcons to working, coincidentally, with orchids, building, breeding boxes for barn owls up in the steeples of churches, and those kind of things. But then subsequently, as I just got a little older and looked around, asked myself, what is actually driving the impact on these environments? What's causing it? And of course, the obvious thing was it's us, it's humans. But what could I do to allow me to enjoy the life that I do like? I like, technology. I like a house. I like being able to travel. What would we need to do that we can, move forward, preserving the natural world and living, in the civilizations that I think we all should admire and cherish because we've done extraordinary things. And that led me to think that we need to do something in energy. And I decided to become a physicist. I decided to study physics and to work on the solutions to provide us abundant, reliable energy. So that's how I got to that, from one led to the other.
Fabulous. I know I'm going to love this conversation. Those are all things that I believe in. I'm very excited about this. You got your PhD from CU Boulder. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the path there was interesting. I studied in Karlsruhe, which is a town in the Rhine Valley in the southern parts of Germany. And, I wanted to do really solar energy research. And back in the early 90s, there wasn't just much of anything going on. The only place there was some research was in the United States, actually, at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory in Golden, Colorado. So I had to find a way to get closer. And so ultimately I applied to and I was admitted to the University of Colorado Boulder. So that's how I got to the United States and got to Colorado.
Fantastic. Where are you based out of right now?
I'm living in the Bay Area.
Okay.
In the northern parts of the East Bay right now.
So I took a similar journey. I was born in a suburb of Denver, Colorado, lived there and went to
Oh, wow.
school in Colorado Springs, and now I'm in the Southern California region. So you and I both went from Europe because I also lived in the Netherlands. I lived in Europe with my wife for 8 years. I'm from Colorado, now living in California. You've taken a similar progression, it seems like.
Yes, yes. The trek westwards, apologize. The trek westwards continues even today.
Do you
So
think that
yes.
you'll end up in Hawaii? Sometimes I wonder. Hawaii seems to
Um,
be like a pretty nice place to live.
yes, it's just the most remote part of the world. There's no
Yeah,
island more further remote than Hawaii. I think I'm going to stay here
yeah.
in the
It's
Bay
it's a
Area.
good
I
spot.
like it here. It's a good spot, yeah.
It's a good spot. So, what you have landed on for those who are just joining us is you have created a technology. Obviously, you've done a lot of pioneering work in the field of solar energy in general with solar capture devices. And your company now, with the poster
Yeah.
behind you, YouSolar, you have a combination of both a solar panel system or a solar capturing system combined with a modular battery system. So you said that
Yes.
a lot of the roads led you to energy. How did you first realize that this was the combination that you would devote your time to?
That's actually, thank you, a very good lead in. So my first company that you can still find and is very impressive in terms of the structures it built was SkyFuel, and I founded it in 2005. And its goal was to build large-scale solar power projects in the desert of the Southwest, and using what at the time was really the only practical commercial solar electricity production technology, which was parabolic trough. Most of your viewers probably won't know what it is, but I encourage them to Google SkyFuel and parabolic trough to kind of see how impressive these structures are. But it turned out there were two challenges with this technology. One was, it was out in the open deserts, and it would one or the other way occupy land, right? That otherwise is used by animals, going back and plants, going back to the start of this conversation. The other one was, of course, that ultimately, it is a technology that requires thermal energy, which needs water, which also later became no longer cost competitive. So between those two and other reasons beyond the control of our company at the time, including the Lehman Brothers financial crisis, the 2008 financial crisis, and other gas fracking, we sold the company ultimately to a Chinese conglomerate, and I became to realize that, we really need to take solar where people use it. Okay, that's above their roofs, and that kind of seems obvious, right? Now, it's not obvious everywhere because I also like to say you got to fish where the fish are. So there's a question whether, a solar panel over a cabin in Finland makes much sense. But, certainly for most parts, and I'll tell the viewers, anything below, between 30-degree latitude, where billions of people live, most people, solar is a completely practical source of energy that doesn't require any auxiliary energy sources like backup fossil. It can entirely stand on its own. But going back to here, there was something that I didn't like about the model had been employed, which was grid-tied solar. That obviously didn't make sense to me because as a former energy consultant, I was aware of the challenges of moving that power in and out of the grid, and ultimately also people that lose electricity connection through the grid didn't see any benefit from the solar panels because it would just turn off. The other one was that that batteries had to come in, and I was actually one of the first proponents of lithium-ion batteries. Looking at the cycle efficiency, this was at the time Tesla was founded. I looked at that and thought to myself, that's really the way we need to go. But then there was a last and third important part, Ross, and that was the third mile of this entire independent energy journey was high power. So solar produces energy, batteries can store energy, but the lithium-ion battery really offered the opportunity for the batteries to deliver high power. And high power is really where everything is at because your home needs to start an air conditioner, needs to occasionally run a stove and a dryer. And that's when peak demand comes in. And being able to deliver that on your own is the first time you really develop some sort of independence from the grid. And that's not in the sense of trying to break free, which many of our customers want, but in terms of the technical dependence on it, so that the grid no longer has to be always there and instantaneously deliver high power, which is costly in an efficient way to deliver energy. So that's been the path to YouSolar, to deliver that kind of a solution. And I'll give you a chance, Ross, to follow up with the question, because I don't want to go into the technology right away.
Okay.
After I explained kind of the bigger picture.
Sure. Well, I think that it's no secret that people know that it's not about the capturing of the energy specifically in huge parts of the world. Think Australia, think the southwestern United States, where there's tons of sun. Like where I live, there's sun almost 365 days a year. We know that we've got tons of sun, but we've got this massive issue where the peak hours of use do not coincide with the peak hours of sun. In the evening time, people tend to use the most energy in general, and the sun is beating down during the day. So we've long understood that it's not the collecting of solar energy, but it's the storing of it for later use, e.g. batteries. And on a large scale, it's often been said, and I'm curious what you think about this, that we simply don't have the battery technology to do that, or we're talking the amount of energy required would require so many lithium-ion batteries to power any kind of city that it becomes impossible. And then we get into other discussions of what kind of rare earth materials or generally rare materials need to be mined to sustain such a battery grid. Do you think that there's a path forward with this current battery technology that could make solar a viable solution for all of our energy needs, or does something else have to change?
Yeah. I'll make a note in a moment about peak demand, or maybe let me allow this make this first. So energy storage in batteries manages the average demand. That's kind of the increase of air conditioner or other residential loads in the evening when people get home. That's still average power. What I was referring to and wasn't clear was the instantaneous power. The moment an air conditioner turns on and draws 3 to 4 times its average power. Delivering that peak demand locally, which might be a little bit beyond what we want to discuss today, is really the most critical and final path for the entire energy storage industry to take. But we can, if you want, Ross, we can follow up on this after this, because it's actually very important. But going back to the main point you made here. It's kind of difficult to say. It's like answering the question whether we go into recession right now or not. I think everyone thinks, but no one knows. And similar, everyone thinks there's a lithium problem, but no one knows, because the planet is quite big, and there's a lot of places that you can get the resources. So I don't know the answer to that. And I've seen, of course, we've seen one or the other study, depending on who wants to make the argument that there's plenty of lithium, plenty of rare earth metals, or others that say no, there isn't. And then those that say just rely on demand and supply, once it's demand, there will be plenty. But I will say as much is that the cost of specifically lithium iron phosphate batteries has gone up about 20 to 30% in the last year. So there is certainly in the short term the sense that there's a supply constraint. Now, that might be entirely driven by the pandemic and related issues, but I'm not entirely sure, because that's not how our suppliers corresponded with us. But going beyond that, the question of distributed versus more large-scale storage, I think the answer is clearly on the side of distributed storage.
Yeah.
And that goes actually back to the argument I want to make in a moment again. And so the answer is yes, I think you need to put the batteries where the load is, not where the energy is generated, where the load is, because that instantaneous peak power, that 10, 15 kilowatt to start a high load appliance, is what really strains the distribution system and is costly to deliver. So yes, I think the batteries need to be right by the load. And I can do a little math, if you like, to explain that.
So the interesting thing, from what I've seen, the video on your website, you've got a modular system, kind of Lego blocks that seem to stack on top of each other in batteries. Yeah. And the use case that I saw is they're put in the garage. And for example, the solar panels, like you said, are on top of the house. So it is modular. So do you determine how many battery blocks, or I think you call them power blocks, somebody needs?
Yes.
Or do they just buy as much as they can have? How does that get figured out?
Yeah, good. So there's a few very important points. You mentioned the word garage. I want to speak about this. You mentioned modularity. But let's talk about sizing here at the moment. We are a whole home power supply. we actually run the house 24/7. We run soon a clinic 24/7. Um, the grid is only there to supply energy. It actually doesn't contribute more than a few solar panels. So if the grid was to go away, there's really on a power level, as we just discussed, there's no impact because the batteries and the inverter deliver all the peak power. There's just a lack of energy, so some energy is less, and that is a problem that accumulates over hours or a day. So with that, we are the utility, and just like the utility needs to decide how many amps, how many kilowatt does that home need? Is it 2 or 3 stories? Is it a clinic? We need to work with the customer to determine how much power the home needs. And then, of course, we also want to balance the energy because we really don't want to be drawing a lot of energy from the grid. So yeah, it's a conversation that we have to do with the customer, but it's getting increasingly more efficient and simpler. And we're doing better at that because obviously we're learning, what these homes look like and how to size them. So yes, now so it's still in consultation and it's still something we have to be involved in, but soon we'll build a model. And it's a lot easier though, frankly, that what our competitors do or other companies that do good work is they're providing energy arbitrage, right? So, if that battery gets it off, by kilowatt, it doesn't matter. It only has 4 or 5 kilowatts to boot. The home needs 25, so it's certainly not there for power. And, whether I'm arbitraging some of my energy or whether I'm still grid feeding some, it's like, okay, made a little mistake, but it's not the dryer quits working, okay? So that's a difference. And by the way, that's what our customers want. They feel like if they have a solar system, if they have a battery, they want to be independent of the utility. Now, going back to the garage and the modularity, that's a very important point that you make. There's a reason why all these large batteries are mounted in garages. You might think, oh, well, that's because there's space. Well, actually, not really. Look at the average American garage. It's pretty busy, often so full they can't even park a car.
True.
The reason it's in a garage because you can drive in the garage, meaning you can roll a dolly and a crate and some heavy equipment in there to mount against the wall because all these batteries are very heavy. There's starting to modularize them. But if you were to take this around the world, where, by the way, people don't have garages, look around the world, lots of places don't have a garage because they can't afford it. And it was never planned into the house. And you need to start moving your battery system by hand. You will run out of options, and therefore the important part about the modularity you spoke to is we need to break the battery specifically down into modules that can be hand carried by 2 people. They can literally walk down the staircase. You don't want to be a piano effort, okay? And it is right now a piano effort, and that is so important for faster penetration, and that's the first thing. And that's what we have accomplished. And I'll talk more about this if you give me a chance later, because there's more that we have done than just breaking it down in size. The other part is you want to make it plug and play, because there's a constraint, right? Even an average solar installer needs to make a choice about which solar systems with a battery they can install, because they only have that many people only that many certification courses they need to take. And even then, they have a lot of other business, and not everyone in the company can do this kind of work. That's a little more tricky. So ultimately, they often are limited too in how many battery systems they can install. And often they just go with one brand, not because they're not recommending the brand because they think that brand is better. They're recommending that particular brand, be that LG, Chem, or Tesla, because you only want to know how to install. So what we try to do with YouSolar is to have a true plug and play system that any electrician can put together and install. So those are the 2 important parts, getting the weight down so that this can be moved anywhere, especially emerging markets, and making it plug and play for the same good reason that we want to overcome obstacles to installation.
Those are fascinating developments. I love that. It's obviously, I can easily understand why people want to be energy independent. It's a very sexy thought to think, what if I didn't need the grid? What if I didn't need gas? What if I didn't need any external thing? What if I could be totally self-contained? The solar panels on my roof power my appliances. They also charge my electric vehicle. They power my stove, so I don't need natural gas anymore. How possible is that? Are there any regions where that is currently possible, or do you always need the power grid in some capacity currently with your solution right now?
So you can be entirely off-grid, and many of our customers are. However, I think practically speaking, it is much better if you stay on the grid connected, no longer grid tight, and I'll make the difference in a moment, and use the grid as, like to call it, an uncorrelated energy source that's available in case your sun doesn't deliver. And that doesn't feed the argument of those that say, oh, well, you're still dependent on the grid and, you didn't really do anything. Without our coal-fired power plants, you wouldn't be there. That's actually not the right way of thinking, because if you want to take that point of view, well, let me get myself a small, fuel cell or gas power generator. And then, and for the little energy that I'm talking about, I'll supplement myself that way. A lot of our customers do that, by the way. And these generators, for example, for the project we have designed for Big Sur that's been running for a couple of years, it was running once a week for 2 hours. Okay, that's all it took, right, to make it 100% energy independent. You don't need a grid for that,
No.
right? So yes, it is very possible, and there's a couple of reasons why that's increasingly possible. However, staying on the grid is actually a good thing. And I want to make the point about the mobile phone that's often confused with a walkie-talkie. An off-grid system is a walkie-talkie, right? You don't need a cell phone tower. But a power block that's grid connected is a lot like a mobile phone, because your mobile phone only transmits for a mile and maybe more, and then goes into a cell phone tower, and then goes into fiber optic cable and connects to your uncle in Florida and comes up the cell phone tower and finds the uncle on the golf course. It is hardly an independent system. You're completely linked in.
Right.
But opening up that last mile, made all the difference, right? And so similarly, if we can, and by the way, we need the grid. The grid will be so important because we'll have so much more electric load on our system that despite our great ambitions, there'll be so many people in urban areas, in densely urban areas, as we electrify our home energy appliances, our electric cars, just don't have enough roof space, right? If you want to provide all the energy in a home, and that excludes an electric car, you cannot have more than 3 or 4 stories. At that point, you're running out of roof space. Fortunately, that's plenty for most Americans, right? We got plenty of roof space, including electric cars for single-family homes. So you want the grid, but you want to transform the grid from what we usually refer to it as a power grid, right? The electric power system. You want to convert it to an electric energy system. You really want to be moving energy around as it's needed, moving from that storage location to the home, to the electric car. And again, once a car starts to charge on a schedule, like, on certain times, coordinating the grid, like at 2 a.m. in the morning, I'll turn on, the grid knows about it. It becomes much more, if you allow me to make the distinction, an energy grid, rather than the, oh my God, I caught you by surprise, boom, I'm going to hit you with 8 kilowatt out of my garage, right? That is a power grid. And so everyone benefits. And as a matter of fact, your viewers should check out some of the companies out there that are working with utility, including ourselves soon, to have a win-win solution where the utilities can breathe and say, oh my God, I don't have to take care of some of these power issues. I can now focus on the energy issues, because delivering power is expensive. I need to install all this equipment. It needs to be there 24/7, and now I can focus on energy. And I'll give you an example, particularly for California, where we're about to plan to bury 10,000 miles of power lines, mostly to rural customers and customers in the urban wildlife interface. So right now, if they lose power, the air conditioner is off instantaneously. The refrigerator starts melting down right away. But what if they all had a high power solar battery system, such as a power block? And the utility may even have installed and provided that at location. Well, the customer would shrug and say, well, as a matter of fact, I don't need any power. I'm supplemental energy. Let me just cut back maybe 5-10%. That's about how much energy you need from the grid. And let those linemen come next week, right? Because all these trucks, all these linemen cost money. If there's a storm in Louisiana after hurricane, these people need to be mobilized from other parts of the Southwest and go there. So it's actually in utilities' interest to think about these models. And so we see that a win-win for both. The grid will remain very important, but we want to move it to an energy infrastructure rather than instantaneous power infrastructure.
So what about in areas like Europe where, again, the Netherlands that I lived in for 8 years, where the sun seems to never shine? What is the solution in those types of areas for the homes there?
Yeah, I'll make the point, of course, just because I'm opportunistic, that we have 39 degrees Celsius in Amsterdam tomorrow,
Right now,
and it clears.
exactly. It's a massive heat
Right
wave
now,
right now.
I think the peak is tomorrow.
I think so. I think you're right.
A clear sky. But that the point is just this is a doesn't the seasonality of sunshine doesn't change with weather, and you're right about that. But then, of course, Europe is at 40 some latitude, not the 30 degrees I'm talking about,
Right.
and it's really. And I'll return. I'm not trying to avoid the subject, but if we want to ask ourselves, where do we go? Where will we win the war on climate? Yes, in Europe and America as well, but the big battles are going to be in emerging markets where growth is even accelerating, and that's where we have to go, and there's no problem delivering solar 24/7. So for countries like Europe, the question then remains is, can they develop alternative infrastructures that can bring energy from southern latitudes, right? And there's the question of, could they bring in hydrogen, right? I mean, suddenly we can bring in hydrogen from Qatar, right? Unfortunately, I think that hydrogen is also generated from natural gas. But we could start thinking, okay, now if we suddenly got this idea that we can supplement by bringing and building out a German hydrogen economy or hydrogen infrastructure, well, let's go a step further and make up, for the seasonal demand with solar installations in desert countries. But I make a point, although now you talk about an energy situation, right? You want to store it in tankers, you want to ship it up. I don't know if I want to be dependent on electricity from a southern country, right, with a high voltage power
Yeah.
line. Because while Putin can turn up the gas, and Germany still has a couple months, and if you shut off electricity demand, you're off the grid instantaneously. So therefore, if I was to advise the German government, I wouldn't suggest to put solar panels into the northern Sahara and run high voltage power lines up there because someone turns them off or they cut off for one or the other reason. You're out. I'd rather say, okay, let's make hydrogen, ship it up there, store it, and buffer it, and develop a clean energy infrastructure. So I think the Putin gas crisis or the Russian gas crisis has suddenly made clear that, yeah, well, seasonality in the Netherlands will make up by importing hydrogen from Morocco or from Qatar or from Australia, for that matter, right? They're
Yep.
exactly anti-cyclical in terms of the summer and the winter.
Right. And
Yeah.
there are those who try to devalue new technology by saying it's better to hold on to an old beater car than to buy a new Tesla because the amount of energy that goes into producing an electric vehicle is greater than the amount of energy that you would use if you just took an old car and ran it into the ground on gasoline. When you need to use presumably fossil fuels to make these green tech products, what do you say to those people who think that you should just skip that step because you need to make these batteries, you need to manufacture these things in a way that isn't necessarily using solar power to get there?
Yeah, I mean, there's a point if that point was used wisely. Unfortunately, it's often used to kind of hold back. I have an old 2006 Passat that is only used to go and drive if we go skiing or if we go on a camping trip where we need something that can get banged up, right? It has a cargo box, has a hitch. It hardly drives, and I would not replace it with an electric SUV because it will require way more energy to produce this vehicle than all the embedded energy in the car. But for the most part, I think people know when that transition happens. It was one of very few things I rely on everyone's personal gut feeling to know when that transition is occurring. And in my case, it's like it's kind of getting to the borderline whether replacing an oil pump for $1,500 because you can't get it anymore makes much sense, or I should say for my electric SUV. I think for most people that's pretty clear. When that happens, because I think intuitively they make it like these microeconomic decisions. But overall, we have an EV, a small one, because we didn't think the big one makes sense for the reasons you indicated, right? If you can get by with a small one. But overall, it's time to change, folks. Do not buy a new gasoline car. I mean, I cannot see a single argument why anyone buy a new gasoline car at this point. And so in that way, I would say it's not only to support the development of technology, which I think is true, and I'll say something to this very, very importantly, but it's also to help yourself because if everyone's telling you that in 15, 20 years they're not supporting gasoline powered cars anymore, that doesn't mean that day will end with a bang. No, it's going to be a trickle and a decay, and you'll be struggling to find a dealer, you'll be struggling to find a mechanic. And so, I would get on the little bandwagon more often and sooner. Um, but I'd like to make another point here, which I think most of your uh, listeners may have not thought about. And I my parents built, I designed one of the first passive houses in Germany. And it was built in 1991, which was about the time the term passive house was defined, or the methodology. And for those who don't know, it's a home, even in Germany, that can almost entirely allow you to live without any heat source. It's super insulated. It has triple insulated walls and windows and water recycling, everything you can ever dream of. And when we built it, my parents paid for it, I would say. I designed it, they paid for it. In 1991, I was only 17. It would cost twice as much as a conventional home. Today, it's only 6 or 7%. And until recently, it only took you a couple of years to pay it off with the gas savings. And now with what we have in Europe right now, it probably pays them off within a year.
Wow.
So you could say, Arnold, foolish you were. Why did you not build this home, 30 years later? Now you today would pay off in a day. Why did you wait? Well, I'll make a point that my mother's and my father's lives are finite, right? My father passed away, but my mother's 80 now. So she would have not spent 30 years in the most modern and comfortable house over some savings just to be proven right today. And by the way, the reason it's so cheap today is because we paid for it at a time. And I think we happily paid for it. So for those who can afford it, and I think many of our customers are in a position, they say, I don't want to wait 30 years until I have an independent power system, until I can enjoy uninterrupted power, until I can enjoy the feeling of being self-reliant. I only get 80 years to live. I'm 55 now. I'm going, right? And then, of course, they also help with their, with the assets they have, with the wealth they have, to bring this technology down so it's affordable for everyone. So think about that you only have that much life to live, and that you probably want to have the things in life that you want sooner than later, not when they become affordable.
I agree. And I think when people experience that feeling for themselves, it's easy to knock it in theory or to deprioritize it. But I think that any person that experiences that, witnessing their energy bill going down to zero slowly, and they realize this thing on my roof is powering my car and my appliances and all of this, I think that's going to be a very addictive feeling for humans in general. It's going to feel very empowering.
Yeah, it's a miracle. I mean, I built these homes, and occasionally, one home end up staying there sometimes because the owner invites me to, when he's not it's in Big Sur, so when he's not at home, occasionally he says, "Why don't you bring your family?" I built the system. It's still a miracle to me that my kids can charge their iPads,
Right.
and we have light, and we run the washing machine, and we're not connected to the grid, even though I'm the person who built it. Right? So yeah, it's a wonderful feeling, and people really enjoy that part of it.
And then something happens to an oil company, their stock plummets, gas prices go up, and you say, I don't care. Doesn't affect me.
Look at my mother. My mother, who lives in a passive house that I designed, do you think she's worried about Putin's
Right.
gas and the energy bill?
So
Not at
cool.
all. That house barely uses any natural gas. And, she has a fireplace. Okay, she's in the countryside. She has a wood fireplace, open fireplace like we have in the past. But not only could she use it, the home has an air recycling system, right? So it's not like, oh, well, the living room will be warm and the rest of the house is cold. No, it will bring in the warm air from the living room and exchange against cold air from the outside, which is vented into all the rooms in the house. So, so she can actually, warm more than just the living room, heat more than just the living room. But certainly, Putin's, this whole natural gas discussion doesn't enter my mother's
I
mind.
love it.
It's not an issue for
That
her.
is so cool. And it's something that I aspire to. I'm still renting. I have a home that could do it, but I'm renting. I don't own it. But I dream of this reality for myself and my family every single day. I dream of installing exactly your product. I would do it tomorrow. I cannot wait. It's a joy that I'm looking forward to in my own life to be able to experience that. And I'm working on it as fast as I can, basically.
Thank you. Make sure it's a power
No,
block.
no, of course. You'll be the first person I think of. You've sold me. I'm convinced.
But yeah.
But I'm also very impressed.
But I will say,
Yeah, go ahead.
thank you. Thank you. Some solace for all the renters out there. I rent too. And why do I rent? Because I poured all my assets into this company. I couldn't afford to buy a house, much to my regret, because we would have probably done well here in the Bay Area. And my wife still points it out every time to me that instead of a house, she has a red
Right,
cardboard
exactly. She's got a
behind,
sign right behind your left shoulder.
but all she got was a sign. So what do I do? Okay, so I'm lucky to buy the energy from a co-op through PG&E, the local utility services, but many others have the same choice. And I decided that we pay for 100% solar in our case, even not just green energy, and it's a significant increase, right? We have a $250 bill, and then people say, "Well, he's the rich CEO of a startup," and I'll tell you, I'm not. It's just something that we spent money on, and we don't have the money for other things. And I repair my daughter's shoes last night. I was in the basement, and she wanted some new running shoes, but they were torn. And I went down and I fixed them up with with some mesh and some fabric. So because I want it, and if you really want it, you can take those steps. So I'm about to convince our landlord to put a solar system in this house in the power block specifically. But that's what I can do, and most other people hope will do is also buy green energy. It doesn't solve the technical issues that we discussed, but it definitely is a big leap forward, and please do so if you can afford it.
I thank you for dedicating your life to what you have done. I really appreciate you
Thank you.
sitting down and talking and sharing your thoughts with me. I think that they do go hand in hand. I value the things that you value, and it's been an honor to speak with you today.
Thank you, Ross, and I hope we will continue this conversation sometime in the future with the success we all have had on this planet with the efforts that we're undertaking.
Absolutely. And I want to give you the final word here. Where do you want people to go? Any last thing that you want to say? I'll let you wrap up this episode.
Yes, very importantly, I and my team can work on things, but we talked about earlier resources, right? Assets. A company like us lives from people believing in us, in buying our product, but also supporting us as investors. So if you want to make a difference and you believe that we are a company that does, please invest in YouSolar. You can do so currently on Start Engine. It's a crowdfunding platform. You'll find us at startengine.com/YouSolar, and you can invest as little as $350 and support the work we do and the transformation we are intending to bring about. And hopefully you will do well in the process of doing so. And that's another way you can drive progress. And it's not just YouSolar, there are other companies out there you can support through investment and, of course, through your purchases. So please come to startengine.com/YouSolar and take a look at our company.
All right, great. Well, it's been a pleasure, Arnold. Thank you so much. And with that, the official podcast is over.